We're on Daf Kuf Yud Gimel Amid Aleph towards the bottom of the Amud, and we're talking about a memra of Shmuel, about the wife of a Cheresh. And in this case, what happened was somebody had a relationship with a married woman who was a Cheresh, and he did it b'shogeg. And Shmuel says that he's not chayiv enoshim tolu. And the reason for that is because although you might say that maybe the Cheresh had das, and therefore his kedushin is valid, and therefore his wife is an eshes ish, and the boel would have to bring an oshim tolu based on the fact that there's a suffix, but we say no, the kedushin is not kedushin, and he's not a bardas. His wife is not an eshes ish. There's no kinyan minat Torah, and therefore there's no chiyuv karban minat Torah. And the Gemara says that we have a brisa to support Shmuel. The brisa has a list of 5 individuals that we don't accept their truma. One of them is a Torem Shel Yisrael, or an Akum Shetorim Mishel Yisrael. And even if the Akum got Rishus, he was given permission from the Yisrael. Nevertheless, his Hafrashas Truma is not Chal, because the Torah says, Ken Yorinu Gam Atem, and we have a drasha, Ma Atem B'nei Bris, Av Shluchachem B'nei Bris. So a guy could not serve as a Shliach, and his Hafrashas is not Chal. In any event, in all these cases, the truma is not chal. And on the list, we have cheresh, correct? That was the first on the list. It says cheresh shota v'katan. So therefore, that supports the logic of Shmuel that a cheresh akidesh, it's not even a suffix eshesish. A cheresh is not a bardas. His maisa is not a maisa. He cannot generate a chalos. Just like he can't be a shliach. He can't be mafresh truma. And it's not even a suffix truma. Sometimes the Mishnah will use a terminology like torem, v'chos v'torem, in a case of a suffix. Here it's not even a suffix. The truma of the cheresh is not valid. It's not truma. You're allowed to eat it even if you're a zar. And now the Gemara is going to reject this raya because we said that according to Shmuel, Habal Eishes Cheresh is potter from an Ochim Toli because he's a Vareim Bodas. For the same reason, his Truma is not a Truma. But we could interpret that Hu Diyomek Rabbi Loza, that maybe Shmuel holds, like Rabbi Loza in the Brisa, that Trumas Cheresh is Chal Misafek. Tisanya Rabbi Yitzchak Omer Mishum Rabbi Lazar, Trumas Cheresh, Lo Teitze Lechulin, Mipnei Shehu Safek. But we don't know exactly what the status of the Cheresh is. Maybe he's a Bardas, and therefore his Truma would be Truma. So Rabbi Lazar certainly disagrees with that Mishnah, and he's of the opinion that Cheresh is a Safek Ben Das. And maybe Shmuel could also agree that he's a Safek Ben Das. So now you'll ask the obvious question: Rabbi Lazar is Hashem Toli v'Nabi l'chayev. But why is it that Shmuel says that he's not chayev and Hashem Toli? And here we got to get into the sort of the nitty gritty details of an Hashem Toli. V'inon chaticha mishtei chatichos. Not every suffix qualifies to be b'chayev and Hashem Toli. You need 2 pieces of meat on the table, or shall we say fat, and one of them is shuman. The other is chalev. So we know that there's chalev here somewhere, which would generate a chiyuv chatas. And here, if he eats one of these 2 pieces of meat, which is called chatich achas mishtei chatichos, then he's chayev and Hashem Tolu. And this is based on a pasuk in Vayikra Hey, V'im nefesh ki sechta v'yosa achas mikol mitzvah shemesh alo te'asenu v'lo yoda v'yoshem v'nosa vono. And Chazal darshan that when it says the word mikol mitzvos Hashem, and mitzvos is in Lashon Rabin, it's mashba that he ate one of two pieces. So that's when he's chayiv an Oshem Tolui, when it's one of two pieces. Here, a man had a relationship with an Eishes Cherish. I mean, there's no suffix about it. The only suffix is, what's the status of the Cherish? But not the Isha. The woman that he had a relationship with is certainly married to the Cherish. The question is whether the Cherish could generate Nesuin Doraisa or only Nesuin Dorabana, whether he's a Bardas or he's not a Bardas. But that's not a case of Chaticha Achas Mishtei Chatichos. So the Gemara now questions whether Rabbi Elazar is actually of the opinion that you're only chayiv an Oshem Tolu if it's Chaticha Achas Mishtei Chatichos. Umi by Rabbi Elazar, Chaticha Achas Mishtei Chatichos. Asanya, we have a verse that says the following: Rabbi Elazar Omer Koi. Koi is a suffix chaya, suffix behema. Now, if it's a chaya, then there's no Isur Chelet. If it's a chaya, there's a chiyuv of Kisei Adam. If on the other it's a behema, then there's an Isur Chelet. If it's a behema, there's no Kisei Adam. So now he went ahead and he ate this koi meat, which was a suffix chaya, suffix behema. So again, if it's a chaya, the chelba is mutter. If it's a behema, the chelba is kares. So the man ate chelev of a koi. And this is not chatich achas mishtei chatichos. It's just simply we don't know the identity of the piece of meat that he ate. Is chayav chayovin, Rabbi Elazar says, al chelbo oshem tolet. So we see that Rabbi Elazar holds that even if it's not shtei chatichos, but it's only chaticha achas, but there's a suffix about the nature and the identity of that chaticha, is then you chayav an oshem tolet. So therefore, we go back to our original question: how could Shmuel accept Rabbi Elazar l'gabe truma, and Rabbi Elazar's shita in truma in the case of trumas cheresh, when a zar ate trumas cheresh, Rabbi Elazar is of the opinion that trumas cheresh is a suffix. We don't know the status of the cherish at the time of his first truma. Was he a bardas? Was he a lav bardas? And we said that if Shmuel accepts Rabbi Elazar's definition of a cherish, that he's a suffix bardas, suffix enich bardas, then the only reason we could justify why Shmuel says that there's no chiyuv Oshem Toli for having a relationship with the wife of a cherish, we explain that because you need chatichas mishtei chatichos. But that's not true, because Shmuel, in fact, holds that all you need is chaticha achas. That's assuming if he accepts the shita of Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar said that in the case of Oshem Toli, even chaticha achas generates Oshem Toli. So my answer is Shmuel savalak Rabbi Elazar b'chada u'polag b'chad. He didn't accept, hook, line, and sinker, all the shitas of Rabbi Elazar. He accepted Rabbi Elazar as far as being a suffix ben das. But if you're asking as to whether or not you need shtei chatichos, then polig alei b'chada. Rabbi Elazar holds that one chatichos is enough to generate an Oshem Polig. And Shmuel's of the opinion, no, that there's no Oshem Polig, because there's no chaticha achas mishtei chatichos. Now the Gemara offers a different tradition as to what Shmuel actually said. Omar Abchi Omar Shmuel, Eishes cherish chayav ale Oshem Toli. Meisvei chabichelo yitrovu, and amongst them is a cherish. So we see that a cherish is considered a vadai eno bardas. So his wife is therefore not married with Ishas Doraisa. How could Shmuel therefore say that Yechayiv Nashim Toli, and the Gemara answers that Shmuel holds like Rebbe Lazar, that Trumas Cheresh is Chala Misafek v'Yachza v'Yitro, and so too he holds like Rebbe Lazar that Yechayiv Nashim Toli even in Chaticha Achas, and therefore Eishes Cheresh Chayav Nashim Toli. So that's the end of the sugya that we started last time, which I think was on Sunday. For Rav Ashi, my time with Rabbi Lazar. Why does Rabbi Lazar insist that a cherish is a suffix ben das? Ifshat shitale the cherish daita klishtahu. Did Rabbi Lazar certainly understand that a cherish has an incomplete das? He's not sharp. He doesn't have 110 IQ even. But Umiyu, what was his suffix? Idaita tzilusa. If that limited amount of das, of intelligence that a cherish has, is called deat slula, it's clear. And whatever he puts his mind to, he definitely has the right kavanah because his das is slula. On Kufyud Beis, Kufyud Gimel Amid Beis, but he loved daited, so but maybe his das is not clear; it's befuddled, and therefore Rabbi Lazar came to the conclusion that the status of a cherish is that of a suffix. Uli olam chada daitahu. Whatever the status of his das, it's always constant. There's no fluctuation; it doesn't change. That was posh. So that's the first explanation of Rabbi Lazar, that cherish is a suffix ben das. He has a weaker das, klishta, but we're not sure if he has das slula for that which he puts his mind to. O Dilma, pshitale de daite klishta v'lav daite tzelusa. The question is it constant? As a general rule, he's not working with a clear mind. Things are befuddled, and we don't know if his kavanah is really worth much. But from time to time, he snaps out of it. The reason why Rabbi Lazar categorizes a cheresh as a suffix ben das is came to itim cholim itim shota. There are moments when he is a pikeach l'chol davar. He has very mature, sophisticated, and clear das. There are other times when he's a shota and his das is completely befuddled, and we'll never know, and we'll never be able to clarify what was the situation that he was in at the time that he was Makadosh and Isha, at the time he was Mafresh Truma. By the way, there's a printing error here. You might want to correct it if you have a pencil. You also have the Masechet here, right, John? So if you see the major paragraph here of our Kufyud Gimel Amid Beis, the first paragraph, 3 lines up before the end, it says Be'ezem Matzah. It should say Be'ezem Matzah. Not the first time I found this printing mistake in the Masechet. Now, the truth is, the Gemara is going to have to ask, L'may nafkamina. The reason for that is because there's no apparent nafkamina here. The first side is to say that his das is always uniform, but we're not sure if he has das slula. And the second side is to say, no, he doesn't have das slula, but sometimes he has das slula. So my nafkamina, at the end of the day, it's always going to be a suffix. But I would say that the nafkamina is going to be if we could test the cheresh at the moment that he gives the get, or the moment he gives kedusha, and we see that he's working with a, see, according to the first understanding, it's always going to be, this befuddled kind of das that is, 50% das that borders on confusion, but it might be das, we don't know, and we can always vacillate. But if you hold that it's itim cholim and itim shota, then we could possibly clarify that that moment he was cholim, and he was working with a full das slula. But the Gemara goes with a different mahal. L'maynaf gemino lahotzi each to begin. Amrit chada daita, who according to the first side in the suffix of Rav Ashi regarding the Shita Rabbi Elazar, when he divorces his wife, and since it's chada daita, is therefore kikidushin kach gerushin. There's absolutely no difference between the das and his status at the time of Kedushin, and now at the status of his das gerushin. And therefore, if you're going to recognize his Kedushin, then you have to recognize his get. There's no logical justification to be machalik between his Kedushin and his get. And that's called chada daita. But it's possible that he was cholim at the time of Kiddush and he was shota at the time of Gerish. Is Kiddush motzi mekadesh, but Gerusha lo motzi megarish. So what was the understanding of Rabbi Elazar? Take it, we don't know. Rabbi Yitzchak, Dvar Torah, Shota Miskareshes. Since there's no requirement of das, she doesn't have to approve and agree to receive the get. So what difference to make if she's a bar das or she's a la bar das? The Torah recognizes the gerish. Like in the case of bikachas, if he threw the get against her will, she didn't have any das, and the shota doesn't have any das. Again, we could have said that a shota is not even a bar das. She doesn't have the potential of das. That's of course agavra. Whereas if she's a bikachas, even if it's bal korcha, but she could have das. Why did the Chachamim say in our Mishnah that Eina Megureshes Kidesh lo yinagu ba minag hefker? We're not going to recognize the get because she's not in any capacity to be shomer herself. He writes in the Masechet, "Anoshim yikoshlu ba, v'lachein ifkiu chachamim es gerushel, v'yidei sheshem bailo leo mishtameres v'lo yavo ba lidei michshel." What does this mean? Sheshem bailo leo. I think what's happening is she's not really living with him because he really wants to divorce her. But since he didn't actually formally divorce her, therefore she's still considered married to him and no one's going to mess around with her because she's still married. So I'm not sure that we paskin like this because I think we have what's called a heter me'rabbanim. And in a heter me'rabbanim, we leave the get for her whenever she wants to take it. But here it's Masha, she can never take the get because Rabban always afraid of recognizing that Gerish. Now, he says that Af b'mokom shebarer shelo yetze michshol lo chilku chacham. What does that mean? Maybe they attach a guardian to her. They appoint somebody to protect her. So let's see the Gemara. Maybe it'll become more clear what would be a scenario in which lo yetze michshol. Hechi dom. What was the shota that Rabbi Yitzchak was talking about when he said that Hagerishim is chal min Torah, even though she doesn't have das, and it's only Xeris Kacham. Ilema deo das lichmar gita. She realizes what a get is all about, and it's a very important document for her to prove that she was Megureshes. But Yodas Lishmar Atzman, she knows that she's not allowed to run around with other men. Is mi Nagi Bei Minag Hefker? Was there a chash in such a case that people be knowing? I mean, she's Yodas Lishmar Atzman, so why do you invalidate the get? Ella, but rather, what's the intention of Rabbi Yitzchak? The Ein Yodas Lishmar Lo Gita V'Lo Atzma. She's a Shota Gemura. She doesn't understand the get. She doesn't know how to protect herself. And then Dvar Torah Shota Megareshes for Amri Debei Rav Yanai V'Nasan B'Yada Mishiyesh Lo Yad L'Garish Asatzma Yotzezu She'en Lo Yad L'Garish Asatzma. The Gemara assumes that Rabbi Yitzchak would certainly embrace the drasha of Rabbi Yanai, and from that drasha we derive the conclusion that the get will only be chal when you put it into the hands of a woman that's called Mishiyesh Lo Yad. Rak isha sheyesh la das. So Rabbi Yanai says that v'nosam biyada, which is mi sheyesh la yad, means she has das of kinyonim. In other kinyonim, she has a das. She can effectuate kinyonim. Therefore, she can accept her get. But if any lo yad, let's say she has no das for kinyonim, so then she's excluded milagarish atzma. She's excluded from gerish. So how could Rabbi Yitzchak say that in this situation there is a get d'oraisa? We see from the drasha Rabbi Yanai that if she has no yad for kinyonim and no das, and therefore she cannot receive a get. So how can you tell me this whole business of Gerushe Shota is only a Gzeira D'Rabbanan to invalidate the get? Vitana, Debei Rabbi Shmuel, we have a price of Rabbi Shmuel to support this halachic principle of Shilcha Mibeso. So basically, you can't be Megarisha. So why did Rabbi Yitzchak say that it was the Gzeres Chachamim that invalidates the get? Our answer is Lo Tzricha, it's a halfway measure. What's Rabbi Yitzchak's case? The Yodas Lichmaras Gita, the Yodas Lichmaras. She has enough maturity to know what the get is and make sure she puts it away in a safe place. But as far as being Noeg B'Minig Hefker, she has no das. She's not the Yodas Lichmaras. Therefore, Torah Shotavitz Gareshes. As far as the Torah law is concerned, it's sufficient that she has enough das, Lichmar's Gita. But the Omer Rabbana Lo Leifka, the Rabbana are going to disqualify the get. Because she doesn't have that level of maturity that she would be Shomeres Es Atzma. Omer Abai Deker Nami. Our Mishnah is also Meduyak. The Mishnah has two dinim in Gerushe Shota. The first one is the Efshel Garish Isha Shenishtates. And furthermore, Kishenishtatesa Habal Eino Yochol Legarish. If he becomes a Shota, he cannot give a get. So there's a difference in the way that the Mishnah formulates these two dinim. When it comes to the woman who became a Shota after her Nesuin, Ishnishtates Lo Yotzi. He cannot be Megarish. When it comes to the second din, which is when the husband lost it, the Mishnah says Lo Yotzi Olamis. So why does it say Lo Yotzi in the case of Isha Shenishtates, and it says Lo Yotzi Olamis in the case of Ish Shenishtat, a Baal Shenishtat? Maishna Achid Kani Olamis, Maishasi Lo Kani Olamis, El Shmamina Hadoraisa Hadrabana. The language of Lo Yotzi Olamis in the case of a Baal who is Nishtata reflects on the fact that he would never be able to be Megarish. Because once he becomes a Shota, Gerushin is out of the question. But when the Mishnah omits the word Olamis, that's a case of Isha Shenishtates. And there it was the entire episode or enterprise of Hafkas HaGerushin is Midrabana. On a Doraisa level, you could be Megarish Shalom Midaita. So that's why it doesn't say Olamis. The Mishnah was very careful. He wanted to teach you that in Avar V'Giresh, Gerish of Chalim. All right, so we got up to Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, which is towards the beginning, the third of the wide lines. That's where we'll pick it up in Mirz Hashem on Yom Rishon.